Hey, welcome back to ZT Audio Channel. Today again, looking at the Fantom, a Fantom 7 here, the new Roland Fantom. This is version 2.0, 2.0, something like that, of the firmware. So if some of these screens look a little different to you, it's probably because you've got a different version of the firmware. So if there's some updates that change this on down the line, I may do a follow-up video. If you're sitting back at 1.6 or 1.5, time to update. What can I tell you? As always, we start out by starting someplace that we can all kind of agree on. And what we're going to do is here, I'm going to check a scene here and going to go ahead and initialize it by hitting Scene Edit, Utility, and then I'm going to initialize the scene so that we can all start from the same place. By the way, that's probably a good place for me to mention the fact that this is the second in a series of videos on the Roland Fantom effects architecture, and this is kind of intermediate level material. So if you are not familiar with the basic operations of your Fantom, this is probably not a video you should be watching, and you probably shouldn't be watching part 2 unless you first watch part 1 on top of that. So if this goes by you too fast, or I do some things off screen here like select zones and you don't know what's going on, I'll try to call that out, but you've got nobody else but yourself to blame if you're jumping ahead of the gun here. You really need to learn to crawl before you walk and walk before you run, and we're kind of somewhere in the middle of between walking and running today. We initialize the scene. I'm going to go ahead and go right into Effects Edit. And we're going to make a couple changes here real quick. One of them is I'm going to turn off all of the effects. Boom. All of them are going to be off. And that'll kind of get us where we want to be to begin with. I'm on zone 1. If I'm off to the left-hand side here and I'm selecting zones, you'll notice that this will change to zone 2 and zone 3. That'll be pretty important later on. When you see these changes happen, if I don't do them on the screen like this, that means that I'm doing them off the screen over here with these zone select keys. One of the little things you ought to know. So we've got no effects on this sound right now, and we're on zone 1. I'm going to select zone 2 and make sure that my effects are off on that, and I'm going to select zone 3 and make sure that my effects are off on that. So we've got 0 effects, a completely dry signal going at this point in time, and that's where we're starting from. An initialized scene, all effects turned off on zone 1, 2, and 3. What we're going to be talking about today, well, let's talk about what we talked about last time briefly. We talked about the MFX section, and that is the effect that will go along with your tone and saves along with your tone. So your individual tones that are in your zones, they can all have an effect assigned to them, and that will be saved with the tone when you save it. However, that doesn't save along with the scene unless you go ahead and save the scene also. The rest of all this stuff, except for the TFX and this Master Effects section over here, we'll get to that in a later video, this all affects, these effects settings here, they will change with the scene and they will be stored with the scene. And that's an important thing to remember. So what we're going to do here is the first thing we're going to take a look at. This video is going to be mostly about the IFX section here and about this upper half signal routing. And you'll notice that as I make change, and I'll go over these in a second, but you'll notice as I make changes here to how I'm routing the output of zone 1, this blue line will change to reflect those changes that I've made. So whatever I assign things to, we'll get blue or yellow lines showing us where they're going. An important thing to remember along these lines is there's a whole section down here, this yellow thing, and that has to do with what's going on with the sort of global or scene level chorus and reverb. So that's an alternate signal path for a send to a chorus and reverb. We're going to go into that in greater detail in another video, but for now I kind of just want you to be aware that there are 2 signal paths, the upper path and the lower path. The lower path is kind of burned in. You don't really change that. The upper path is assignable, and that's going to make a big deal of difference to us. So for instance, watch what happens. Let's see if I turn on IFX1, and I play the piano now on zone 1. Doesn't sound like it did anything, right? Well, let's hit the edit key, and we'll see. Well, the first thing is that's set to through. So let's, at least for the purposes of this demonstration, let's set it to something that's going to be really obvious so that we could tell when we're using an effect or not. I'm going to use script 100, which is a based on the MXR phase 100 phase shifter. And I'm going to go ahead and turn these settings up a little bit so that it's a more extreme. And you'll notice I'm still not getting anything, and no matter what I do, I don't know what's going on here. I'm not getting anything. Well, the reason why that's happening is because even though that effect is turned on, look where the output of zone 1 is routed. That blue line goes straight over to the master effects section. It doesn't get anywhere near IFX, right? So what I'm going to do, first of all, I want to be in parallel because I'm going to use these effects independently, and I'll show you the difference in a second here. I'm going to say I want to take my main output, and I can choose one of several different places that I can go. IFX1, IFX2, sub-out, which is the sub-outputs in the back. I did a video on that earlier you might want to check out if you haven't already. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to route that to IFX1, and you'll notice now there's our routing. Out of zone 1, sends it to IFX1, out from IFX1 to the master effects section. And if I play it, now I've got that really extreme phase shifter effect, okay, from the script 100. Well, let's see what happens if I go to IFX2 while I'm in parallel mode. Well, kind of the same thing's going on. Well, wait a minute, I routed it to that. I'm routing it through IFX2. How come nothing's happening? Well, because I've got this set to through. I'm going to have to set some kind of actual filter or something, some kind of effect that I can hear it actually doing something. Ah, now you hear that step filter effect. And so you can see that I've got separately, when I'm in parallel mode, I've got two separately addressable insert effects, IFX1 and IFX2. And depending upon whether I route this to IFX1, I'll get the phaser. If I go to IFX2, I'll get that step filter. Well, what if you want to use both? What if, say, for instance, you say, well, I'd like to come out of that phase shifter into that step filter or some other combination of effects, maybe a chorus going into a delay. Well, let's see what that might look like. Well, let's take IFX1, hit edit, and let's find a nice delay. Just a nice delay of some kind. A tap pan delay. Wait a minute. I have the effect still routed through IFX1, so I'm going to have to change that. Let's go to this and change it to IFX1. So now I've got... Okay, so I've got a nice, it's maybe a little subtle, so let's go ahead and let's turn up that, that balance a little bit. In this case, it's really obvious that might not be the effect that I'd actually want in real life, but trying to make this obvious for you folks here. So I've got IFX1. Now, if I change this to serial, watch what happens. We'll do it again. First, I'll go back to parallel so you can see. Now, watch how this routing changes from going through IFX1 and then to the master effects. If I switch to parallel, to serial, then it comes out of IFX1. It doesn't go to master. It goes from IFX1 to IFX2. So let's see what we have in IFX2. Oh, we've got that step filter. Maybe we want to do something a little bit different, like use a chorus, okay? So now let's turn off these effects just to hear what it's like without them. Let's hear the chorus. And again, that might not be obvious enough for the audio on a video like this and the way that YouTube kind of compresses that audio sometimes. So I'm going to turn that up a little bit more. All right, that should be a little bit more obvious. If I turn on and off the chorus, there's off, and then there's what is on. And then the same thing with this pan tap delay. Okay, now let's turn them both on, and I'll have the tap pan delay feeding out to the chorus and then going what? To the main output, right? So that's how that works. I've got IFX1 and then feeding out of that an IFX2, and I can do that on a zone-by-zone basis. I should say that on a scene level, you can only select serial or parallel, and that will be the same for the whole scene. But how you set the routing of the individual zones can be different. IFX1 will always be the same effect, and it will always route into IFX2 if I'm in serial mode. But I can play some other tricks here. So for instance, on zone 1 right now, I've got that both effects going. If I switch to zone 2, you'll notice I don't have any effects. And if I select IFX1, well, since we're in serial mode, that means it's also going to go to IFX2. So we get pretty much the same thing. But watch what I can have happen here. Instead of going to IFX1, in serial mode, I can actually say to IFX2. So now, on zone 1, I've got IFX1 and IFX2 both active. And in zone 2, I've got only IFX2 affecting this because I routed it directly to IFX2. So only the chorus with no delay. Now you might say, well, now wait a minute. What if I want these things to be directly accessible one way or the other? That's the way the other mode works. When I go to parallel, you'll notice that when I go back to zone 1, I've got just the delay. When I go to zone 2, I've got just the chorus. So that's the difference between parallel and serial. Now, an important thing to recognize about this is that unlike the zone level effects, these are not saved with the tone when you save them. They are saved with the scene. So this configuration as to whether you're using parallel mode or serial mode, that is a scene level setting that affects the whole scene. But then on a zone-by-zone level, you can route whether you want to go to IFX1 or IFX2. If you're in parallel mode, that means you can select these effects independently, okay? And if you're in serial mode, that means you can kind of select them semi-independently, because if you select IFX1, that means that by default, it's also going to go through IFX2. If you select IFX2 by itself, that means that it only goes to IFX2. And then we go on to the master effects and the chorus and the reverb and all that kind of good stuff. That's probably enough for this video to get your head around the concept of what the IFX sections work like. And of course, as always, you know, we do some work. You want to save the scene. Boom. Let's save that scene. So now, if we went to another scene, we've got a completely initialized scene. Nothing's happening there. We go back to this scene, and it's however we left it. We can just, boom, jump right in here and take a look at our effects. And our effects are arrayed as we want them to be. That's the IFX section. It's saved at the scene level. And that, like I said, that's about enough for this video today, but that ought to help you get your head wrapped around how this upper level blue line routing works, at least so far as the IFX is concerned. In future videos, we'll go over the bottom path for routing, the one here in yellow, and that'll kind of get us right into how the master chorus and reverbs section work, as well as the global level master effects. Those are the next things that we're going to handle in maybe the next 1 or 2 videos. So that's the IFX section for today on the Roland Fantom. Thanks again for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you would, hit the old like and subscribe button. That'll encourage me to do more videos like this and to do them more often. Hint, hint. We'll see you next time, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.